Today's installment is the fear of not doing it right. I'm going to talk about what that means, the fear of not doing it right. And I think this is going to be really important because we're going to touch on some pieces that you might have experienced. You might have done something in the past. You made an attempt to, make some change. You notice that there's some issues out there and you went to make some change, or you went to step in and it didn't go well. Or you might not have, or feel as if you have the right words to say to intervene. So I understand that there's going to be fear. And I've been a school principal. I've been in several leadership roles. And I know sometimes when you have subordinates, sometimes when you have staff, when you have constituents regarding your department, regarding your school, regarding your district, it can be a challenge sometimes because of fear of whatever reasons. And so we'll be talking about that today. So make sure, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, if you're not hitting that bell, make sure you're doing that so that way you can keep up with each week as we move along. All right, today's agenda: social pressures. Okay. Social pressure, the fear in our hearts. And then we'll wrap things up with asking for a friend. I'm excited to bring to you today's content. I've been spending the week putting all the research together, putting the PowerPoint together, and so I'm excited to share this with you. All right, let's start with social pressure, the fear in our hearts. Now, as a school leader, when we think about social pressures, okay, what are some things that impact our decisions? Now, if you've taken advantage of the free course that I have available on the website, leadenequitycenter.com, there's that implicit bias course there. And one of the things we talk about 4 different biases. And one of those biases is the conformity bias. So if you're a school leader, one of the challenges that we could have as a school leader when it comes to the influence of social pressure is the conformity bias, or the tendency to change one's beliefs or behavior to fit in with others. The example I like to give in this situation, let's just say you're a school principal. You're looking to adopt a new school curriculum. Maybe it's you're deciding, do I want to promote maybe social emotional learning? Maybe do I want to approach universal design for learning, or something else, or some sort of change that you're trying to implement, for example. And you're thinking, okay, how do I approach this? Because as leaders, we want folks to follow. And so we're like, okay, I know that this teacher's probably going to give me a little bit of pushback. I know that this teacher probably doesn't like change at all. Here's a brand new teacher. They're already kind of feeling overwhelmed. So we're assessing all these different variables with what it comes to what it's going to take to implement this change and to get that buy-in. Right now, most leaders will know, okay, I probably can get 90%, but if I want 100%, or I might can get 60% of my staff on board. But if I want to push those numbers a little bit higher, I need to get a certain staff member. Maybe it's an OG teacher. Maybe it's another individual who has a lot of pull. And so what I might do, and I've seen this before, where it's like you call in that individual who has all this pull, who has a good reputation, of other teachers, other staff members tend to follow them. And we're thinking from a political side of things, right? That's sometimes how it is. And you have a meeting with them, and they might tell you something like, okay, I can get the rest of the team on board. I can help you out with this. However, there's a trip that I'm wanting to take. I want to take some time off 3 weeks from now. Or there's this other thing that I need, or can you help me out in this area? Now, you may not personally agree with this tactic. You might say, you know what, this doesn't feel right. However, you want to get this process change. You want to get this system in place. You want to put these new rules. Whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. And so as a result, you go along with it. Or they might ask you to tweak something just a little bit again, but it might be something that you don't agree with. From another standpoint, maybe you are leading a staff meeting. And as you're leading the staff meeting, you're hearing stuff being said. Maybe some of your other teachers are saying some things, or other staff members are saying some things that you don't agree with, but it seems like everybody is on board with this. But again, it goes against what you know is right, or your own beliefs. And as a result, maybe you're brand new principal. This is your first year in, you're just getting started, and you don't want to ruffle the feathers too soon. And so you go along with it, as opposed to really sticking to your guns, or as kids say these days, stand on business. Stand on business. Anyway, all right. So you might go along with things again that go against you. That is the influence of social pressure. So as leaders, the influence of social pressure is real. Here's another example: fear of conflict or confrontation. Let's go back to that example where you have this teacher who's prominent within your school. They have a lot of pull, and you butt heads a lot because again, they seem to have a good portion of your team, your staff on their side. So maybe this again, social pressure can influence your decisions because of you want to avoid any sort of controversial things. If I make this move, if I get rid of this practice, if I tell my team we're no longer accepting, I don't know, lesson plans every other week, I want them every week, or there's something else that we're trying to change and we don't want the conflict. We know there's going to be pushback. We're afraid of that pushback. So rather than making change or leading that change, which will benefit who? The students, right? Benefit the students. But because we might be afraid of a community member or a parent or a staff member and how they're going to respond, and we don't want to butt heads. We don't want that conflict. We don't want the smoke. We may not want the smoke. And as a result, that confrontation impacts our decisions. Another example, school norms. I like to call this one, we've always done it this way. How many times you know that there's a tradition or a practice? Maybe it's a chant. Maybe it's a spirit week thing that you do every year. Maybe it's something that happens at an out of school event. You know, every year we run this fall festival or we run this event and you know it's wrong. You know it isolates a certain group of people or it makes fun of people. Folks, it's 2024. I'll say this real quick. It's 2024. If you still have a mascot, Native American mascot, or Native American, here where I live, there's a school called the Savages. It just breaks my heart. Racial slurs as your team, like that's your team. In 2024, if there's practices, if there's, again, traditions, things that we do every year, this is what we do. And you know it's wrong. Like, it's 2024. We need to make some change. However, you're afraid that I'm afraid to make these changes or lead these changes because of the pressure. Parents are going to come up to me and say, you know what? I wore that jersey. I had on a headdress when I was a kid. We need to keep the heritage. We need to keep the traditions going. Not that it's right or that it's wrong, but it's just, well, that's what I did when I was younger. When I went to high school, I want my child to do that. I want my grandchild to experience those same traditions, even though there might be cultural appropriation happening there. There might be some flat out racism happening within these practices. However, that social pressure is there. We could lead these changes. Again, this is all about creating a sense of belonging, whether if it's one child or a group of children. If they feel as if they do not feel accepted, supported, or included within the environment, you will not have a sense of belonging. Those school norms make a difference. And then the last one here, personal beliefs, the convictions that may influence our decisions. I did an interview with Brother Rudy Kafele right around January 21st, not January 21st, January 6th, 2021, I believe it was. And I remember one of the things he said stuck out to me. He said there might have been educators storming the Capitol building. That was like, it hit me hard because I mean, he's right. There could have been school principals, superintendents, for all I know, might have been out there January 6th. So imagine how those personal beliefs can impact what we want to do when it comes to change. I don't agree with that person's lifestyle, or that I don't agree with how they paint their nails or the way that they dress. It has nothing to do with their academic or social emotional support. It's just strictly on what we believe. Oh, you know what? I'm not going to pay a lot of attention to that. Or I don't think it's there's no sense of urgency because it goes against my morals and my beliefs. When we do these type of things, it can lead to or perpetuate other things such as exclusion, or the opposite. We talked about this before. The opposite of exclusion is tokenism. What comes to my mind is the Atlanta cheating scandal. I want to say I just saw an article, who knows, a few months ago, where it seemed like they were still going on. The largest criminal history, or what is it? The largest I'm saying this wrong. The largest criminal case in Georgia's history was a cheating scandal. Why? Why was that cheating scandal there? Because of all the pressure for your students to perform well. Unfortunately, we see a lot of our schools put into, academic support needed or probation. I don't know if it's academic probation, but they get into those warnings where state might take over. And so there's that pressure of making sure that students' test scores are high, and sometimes ethical and moral decisions come into question. Or the exclusion piece might mean that, I got a gifted and talented program, or I have another program for academic excellence or scholarships that are available, but I only provide it to those certain groups of students. I only give to certain groups of students because I know they're going to utilize this web. They can handle that. When we don't talk to our teachers about, okay, you're teaching an honors class or you're teaching a dual enrollment class, make sure that you're advertising this to everyone, not just tapping certain students on the shoulder and asking them, or certain parents reaching out to them and say, hey, I want Johnny to take my class. I'm teaching dual enrollment. The exclusion can take place. I want my students to pass this honors class, so I'm just going to ask certain folks. What's the opposite of that? Oh, when I look at my representation, I only have, all my kids seem to look the same, and I need to bring in that one or two to meet my quota of students for that token side, right? So the opposite of exclusion is tokenism. All right, now the other part is there could be cultural insensitivity. Oh my God. Cultural insensitivity. We always do it that way. We're going to have a special party. We're going to do, I don't know, maybe a Halloween party. And what might happen in those Halloween parties, students come dressed up a certain way that might be offensive to other groups of folks. Or we just flat out could care less about what we're doing because, again, we've done it this way for years. This is our tradition. It may perpetuate cultural insensitivity. Then we got to think about our representation. And again, the good and the bad when it comes to representation. Representation, our students, especially students who do not have, they're already not part of the dominant culture. And I know what it's like. And my kids know what it's like when they're in a space where it's just them or a handful of folks that share a similar identity. Do they have a space for them to engage with one another and have conversations, such as maybe an affinity group? Are those available at your school? Doesn't mean that they're gangs. It doesn't mean that we're separating, segregating, further perpetuating. No. What we're doing is we're creating a space where a student can have conversations, maybe even talk to an adult, talk to their peers about similar interest. I like to use the example. We have chess clubs, we have glee clubs, we have different clubs all the time. But as soon as you separate it by personal identities, that's where we seem to have problems. Doesn't mean that, there's so much research that supports the benefits of having affinity groups. Also, when you think about representation, you have over-representation in special education versus your gifted and talented program. What about your school government? Do your students are their voices amplified? Because they have a voice, but are we amplifying their voices? Or are we only saying, okay, you guys can talk when I give you the opportunity to talk? Student government meetings are only available during lunchtime every other Monday. That's the only time I want to hear you. I'll give you the end of the semester. We'll let you present. Or do students have opportunities to engage with their staff, their teachers when they need to engage with their teachers? Now, I always like to use caveats. That doesn't mean just have an open door policy at your school because you probably won't get no work done. So there still needs to be some boundaries. But we want to make sure that we're getting student input, what they feel, what they need in order for them to feel accepted, supported, and included. Okay, the next one is disproportionality. You see it a lot in our discipline practices. Look at your data. Who's getting kicked out of classrooms? Who's getting suspended? Who's getting expelled? These are just some of the things that social pressures can put forth. Let's move forward. The fear of not doing it right. Again, this goes back to those things that maybe it's a fear of saying the wrong thing. Maybe this is a boat that you can recognize or identify with. Saying the wrong thing. I don't want to get accused of being sexist or misogynistic or racist or whatever it is. I don't want to say the wrong thing. The fear of offending each other, or the fear of having to face that what we've been doing is not working, for some of our kids and facing the fact that those kids might be of color. It might be students who are learning a language. It could be students who are in poverty. It could be students who have special needs, and coming to terms and realizing, you know what, I got to look in the mirror and face the music, if you will, and recognize, you know what, we've been doing this. That's been harming students for years. And we say on our handbook, or it's right there on the wall, right when you walk into our hallway, we love all kids no matter what. But yet, some of our practices are negatively impacting certain groups of students. But in order for us to recognize these things, we have to be willing to have these conversations. The fear of saying the wrong thing or offending each other, that's how we learn. But if we say, you know what, I made a mistake and I just never want to make that mistake again, how will we grow? I found this article or this research was done where the question was raised to a group of students. How do we ensure that students of color feel like respected? And they asked several questions. And what they found from their research was 5 things. Students felt respected when they received help when they were in need, their boundaries were honored, they were appreciated, and their feelings, ideas, and perspectives were valued. And finally, their learning and growth was prioritized. It makes me remember right around George Floyd and COVID. It kind of happened around there. COVID was happening, and then George Floyd happened. And I remember talking to a group of students about their high school experience. This is towards the end of the school year. And I literally, I can hear the kids saying this. We felt like our teachers or our school just wanted us to finish the year. We didn't feel like our learning and growth was prioritized. I felt like this was just a time where folks were just trying to get us out. They were trying to finish the year, get us out for the summer so they can plan for next year, because COVID happened. It just threw everything off in their mind. And that's how the students felt. But again, we will never know how they're really experiencing education unless we ask them. But if we're too afraid to get that feedback, because kids will tell it like it is. They'll tell us, nah, bruh, that ain't it. I'm not happy. You know what? I think my teachers are not treating me fairly. I don't think that this tradition that we celebrate every October, I can't identify with this. Or I like to sit with my friends, and we tend to sit in the back of the cafeteria, but now we start to feel bad because our teacher always comes up to us and asks us, well, why y'all always sitting in the back? Why don't you come join everybody else? No, we don't want to. And I feel comfortable here. But now I feel pressured by my teachers to interact with folks, even though all day long I'm in the same space where I feel like I'm always the odd person out. And I just want 30 minutes during lunchtime to spend with someone that looks like me or shares some similar identities. And now I'm feeling bad about doing that because my teachers are telling me, oh, why you always got to do that? Or they said it one time, and now every time they look at me, they in the lunchroom, they shake their heads. How does this make me feel as a student? But again, we'll never know these things. We don't ask these questions to our students. How will we get this feedback? But I digress. Let's talk about leading respectful communities. How can we do that? All right. One way is model respect. When we model respect, our students see how we treat other students, how we treat our peers, the other teachers, the other staff members, community members. The way we model that learned behavior, that social learning theory, when we start to model those type of things, our students pick up on that. They can tell if you're treating someone that looks a little different or someone that is not part of the dominant culture. They can tell if you're treating them differently. So we need to be making sure that we're communicating properly, that we're treating folks fairly and equitably in our approach. That should be what we're modeling to create that or shift that school culture. We also need to measure what matters. We talked about disproportionality. Talked about representation. But again, how will you know that if you don't look at the data? Perform those climate surveys. In my book, I'll have a sense of belonging assessment instrument. It's something that school leaders can use. And again, it doesn't mean do it one time at the beginning of the school year. It needs to be reviewed often. And the last piece I like to throw in there, if we're not doing this already, is restorative practices. This is a great opportunity for your students to sharpen their relationship and resolution skills. And not just your student. I think it's valuable for adults as well. Okay, but it creates that culture where folks develop a level of respect that is beneficial to everyone. Those are just some ways that we could lead respectful communities. All right. Asking for a friend. Maybe you can relate to this. Actual quotes from people that I've spoken to, educators that I've spoken to, or leaders that I've spoken to over the years. Here's the first one. I'm afraid to approach my friends or teachers of color for advice on engaging with Black boys or supporting students from low income backgrounds. I worry that I might unintentionally offend someone or come across as ignorant. I don't have this identity, and I recognize maybe they need some extra support, or maybe there's some, from an equitable standpoint, there's some areas that I need to focus on in order to relate or to engage students that might have various backgrounds that aren't like mine. But I'm afraid to ask someone who might share that background. So I'm afraid to ask my fellow Black teachers, or maybe I'm afraid to ask another student, another teacher or peer who has other identities that these students that I'm particularly trying to reach, maybe English wasn't their first language, and I want to ask them, well, how do I support them? But if I ask that question, what kind of repercussions may I face? Oh, I'm being accused of this or being accused of that. I'm too afraid to engage in these conversations. So who ultimately gets negatively impacted? Those Black boys, those low income students, because you're afraid to ask the questions. However, okay, I'm gonna throw this out because this happened. Maybe you do share that identity and your thoughts is, or maybe your demeanor is, well, it's not my responsibility to educate others to serve as the representative of my identity. You see the conflict there? You got one person that says, look, I recognize I need to support these students that have certain identities, but I'm afraid to ask because I don't want the answer of, well, it's not my responsibility, and vice versa. Person says, well, it's not my responsibility. You need to figure that out on your own. And you can see how this can detrimentally impact our students, the ones who need to be discussed, the ones who need these questions asked. The questions aren't answered. As a result, who misses out? It's the kids. Okay. I get it. I completely understand how this scenario here can be a challenge. Now, me personally identify as a Black male, and I have learned over the years that, because I had the same mindset. Well, it's not on me. Why should I have to educate folks? And I still have that identity or mindset rather, but it comes from, don't let me be the only person or the only information that you're getting. That makes sense. So, for example, I can give you my opinion. I can tell you how I feel as when I was a Black boy growing up in school, and this is what helped me, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the way to go. That's the only thing. Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings did a lot of research on Black boys, for example. Culturally responsive teaching came from that work. Pick up one of her books. Pick up other books. Do your own research. And the thing that you have to do, if you do want to speak to a colleague, is not make those assumptions that all your colleagues that have that same identity should know the answer to it. Simple question you can always ask is, has this been your experience? Let's say I'm wanting to go up to, again, let's say I'm having some challenges with reaching my Black boys in my classroom, and I have a Black male teacher in a building. I go up to him and say, hey, these are some of the challenges that I'm experiencing. What do you think I should do? Versus, has this been your experience? Or what was it like for you as an educator? What helped you? And then again, don't let that be your only answer, but also follow up and get additional support from reading books, other resources, maybe try some things out, maybe ask parents, maybe ask those Black boys what would support them. What do you like in my class? What are some things you like? Ask those questions. But again, you will not get any progress if we don't ask. And I always encourage my educators out there who do have these lived experience. One thing to do, I know it's easy to have the mindset of, well, it's not my responsibility. And I totally understand. But I would like to see if we can look at it from a different perspective. Rather than thinking it's not my responsibility to educate others or serve as the representative of my identity. Again, I'm a person, a Black man that lives in Idaho. So I'm feeling that way all the time. But then also I have learned that a lot of people genuinely don't know. They're just ignorant. They have absolutely no idea. And so if I can be a touch point that can support them in their efforts, because they're genuine, a lot of times people genuinely don't know and they're just asking because asking for a friend, right? They want to know. I say, hey, this is my take. This is what I think. I don't represent my whole entire race, but this is what I believe. This is what helped me. But I also suggest that you go look into this person's book or look at this research. It might further support or enhance your needs. I love this quote here. The man who asks a question is a fool for a minute. The man who does not ask is a fool for life. Listen, it's better to ask the question to get that knowledge. And yeah, in that moment, you might feel a little foolish. Look, I hate to ask, but I'm just curious. But when you don't ask and you remain silent, guess what? You'll never know. Think about that first part. The man who asks a question is a fool for a minute. That feeling is temporary. You're fool for, like, you don't know. You're ignorant for just a moment. Asking that question helps you learn and grow. The second part of that quote, the man who does not ask is a fool for life. Guess what? When you don't ask and you don't seek that knowledge, you will never know. It lasts forever. You got to seek clarification, ask for understanding. You can't be afraid to do that because you're afraid of offending or hurting someone else. Rather than making those assumptions and just operating off of assumptions, ask the questions. I think this quote encourages one's curiosity. It also puts you in a very humble and often vulnerable state, but you are willing to learn. At the end of the day, it's better to risk just a moment of embarrassment by asking these questions rather than to remain ignorant forever. Because at the end of the day, when we don't ask these questions, we can go to all the PDs we want. We can go to equity PDs. We can go to diversity, equity, inclusion PDs. We can do all the work. We can read a bunch of books. We can do all these things. But if we're not having these conversations, if we're not engaged in communicating with one another, then our students are going to negatively be impacted. And sense of belonging is not going to be there. We talk about this all, like, we have to talk about these things. Social pressure, I know it's real. It's a big deal. However, we have to be willing to engage in these conversations and ask these questions. Fear of not doing it right has to go away.